What is up, guys? Bobgar here, and today we're going to take a look at modern mono white goats 10 ticks on Magic Online. Let's jump into the cards. We're going to start at the bottom. It's got a devotion deck, so we're going to need to build up a bunch of devotion. Thraben Inspector and Weathered Wayfarer are our 1-drops. Thraben Inspector is a 1/2 that when it comes into play creates a clue token that we can pay 2 mana and sack to draw an extra card. So basically a 1/2 that replaces itself slowly over time. Weathered Wayfarer is a 1-drop that has a really cool ability. Pay 1 white mana and tap it, search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Play this ability only if your opponent controls more lands than you. So basically, if your opponent controls more lands than you, you can pay a mana and tap it to tutor for a land. And it's not just a basic land, it can be any land. So that's going to be important for this deck. We're running a couple different non-basic lands we might want to tutor for. For White of the Night Orchid, this is another card that helps us get back to parity / ahead on lands. 2/2 first strike. When Knight of the White Orchid comes into play, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a plains card, put it into play, and then shuffle your library. So if we're behind on lands, we can get a land into play, and not only that, it comes into play untapped, so we could use it that turn if we want to. Under the Pure, we are obviously running a bunch of dorky creatures. It gives them all +1/+1. Just a kind of nice 2-drop enchantment, and also gives us some devotion to white, and is hard to remove. So that's why we're running Honor the Pure there for that. And then onto the slightly higher drop devotion cards. For Flicker Wisp, as we've already seen, it combos really well with some cards in the deck. You can get an extra clue token off a Thraben Inspector to sack for a card. You can Flicker Wisp a Knight of the White Orchid to get another land if you're behind on land. And as we'll see in a little bit, you can also Flicker Wisp Springjack Shepherd, which will get you a ton of goat tokens. So that's another one of the big reasons to run it. Or Thalia's Lancers, which gives you a tutor, but we're going to go over those in a second. So next up, Boros Reckoner, we're running as a 3-of. This is here just because it's a pretty good 3-drop, and it's our best 3-drop devotion card. It gives us all 3 white pips for a 3/3 with some pretty cool abilities. You can pay a mana to give it first strike, and more importantly, if it takes damage, it does that much damage to target creature or player. Next up, Springjack Shepherd is a 1/2 for 4, which doesn't sound great, but its secondary ability is super cool. Chroma, which is basically the same as Devotion. When Springjack Shepherd comes into play, put a 0/1 white goat creature token into play for each white mana symbol in the mana cost of permanents you control. So your devotion to white. So you get hopefully a whole lot of 0/1 white goat creature tokens, at least one because of the Springjack Shepherd itself. And this is one of our big avenues for winning the game. We flood the board with goat tokens. We can make a trigger again by Flicker Wisping her. And all of our goat tokens, even though this says 0/1 there, we already saw we run Honor the Pure, so a lot of times they're 1/2s or 2/3s. And then finally, in our kind of devotion package, we run Thalia's Lancers. Thalia's Lancers is a super neat card. First strike, 4/4. When Thalia's Lancer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a legendary card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So it tutors for any legendary card in our library, while also being a decent first strike threat. 4/4 first strike matches up pretty well with a lot of things in Modern, and a 5/5 first strike matches up against even more, which is what it is if we have a single like Honor the Pure out or something. And so since we have Thalia's Lancers, we need to run some legendary cards. So let's take a look at our kind of legendary package here. We're going to start off with the big finishers. Probably the most important card is Elesh Norn. It works really, really well with our goat package because it gives them all +2/+2, as well as giving your opponent's creatures -2/2, meaning our army full of goats can probably swing in and win on the spot. Iona Shield of Emeria is a great angel. Flying 7/7, and when it comes into play, you choose a color. Your opponent can't cast spells of that color. So against mono-colored decks, you can just basically lock them out of the game. And even for 2 or 3 colored decks, a lot of times there's really one color you need to shut down to be able to win, and you know what that is. So I think less important than Elesh Norn usually, but still a very strong card and a very neat card. Then some lower drop legendary cards we can tutor for. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben is the classic taxing effect. 2/1 first strike, non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. We're not running a whole lot of non-creature spells, so this is pretty good for us. And it definitely shuts down decks like Storm pretty hard. They struggle a lot when all of their spells cost 1 more. And then the other version of Thalia, Heretical Cathar, or Heretic Cathar rather. First strike, 3/2, so a little bit bigger than the other one. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponent controls enter the battlefield tapped. This can be pretty nice against aggro opponents. or opponents that run a ton of non-basic lands can slow them down a little bit. So sometimes we just need something like that to put out pretty quick. And so that's the first set of tutor targets. And then we have a whole nother set of 4 more tutor targets. So 8.5 Tails is probably the weirdest one. I like it because it gives us 2 devotion to white. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is never terrible, and its abilities are really neat. They're not super useful in the deck, but occasionally they help us burst through for the last bit of damage or protect our creatures. It has pay a colorless and a white. Target permanent you control gains protection from white until end of turn. Pay a colorless. Target spell or permanent becomes white until end of turn. So if your opponent tries to terminate your creature, you can make terminate white. You can give your creature protection from white, and the terminate will fizzle for 3 mana. So a little expensive because it costs 3 mana to do. Definitely better if your opponent is naturally playing white, but even if they're not, just gives you a really good way to block the opponent's various spells and abilities. Spear is another pretty good one to grab, especially if you already have an army of goats out and you don't have a good way to play Elesh Norn in the near future. You can grab Spear of Heliod, play it down, and then all of your creatures get +1/+1. So basically the same kind of thing as our other Anthem effect. It also has a neat secondary ability. Pay 3 mana, tap, destroy target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. Not super useful to us, but if our opponent has like a single go tall threat, if we can get this out and play it down and use that ability and take it out, we're in pretty good shape. And then on to a couple lands. A Ganjo Castle is probably the least interesting. We do have a lot of legendaries, so its ability of pay a white and tap it, prevent 2 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn is certainly not worthless. But the big reason we have it is just to tutor for a white mana if we need it, basically a plains. And it just never really hurts to have in the deck. It works about the same as a plane, comes in untapped and taps for white. It's legendary, so we don't want more than one of it, but that's perfect for our kind of like tutor target package. And then the important one, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, we're running as a 3 of. This is a pretty good tutor target if we have pretty high devotion and maybe we already have a threat to put down. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to choose a color, add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So a lot of times we'll have like a devotion to white of 4 or 5. We'll be able to basically pay the equivalent of 3 mana to get 5 mana. Because this basically costs 3 mana, because you have to tap itself and then 2 other mana producers. So that's the entire tutor package. We're looking at one other card. Not a super important one, but a pretty nice one. Cloud Shift is just a simple 1 mana card that basically lets us blink our creatures. And we have a lot of creatures that are worth blinking, as we already saw. The same targets that are good with Flicker Wisp are good with this. And yeah, it also helps us protect our creatures. So if we know our opponent is going to try to kill something, we can Flicker Wisp, or we can Cloud Shift it in response to save it. But mostly it's good for just playing on our Goat Maker to make even more goats for just 1 mana. Pretty sweet. And then we'll get into the lands. So we already looked at 4 of the lands. That is the castle and the 3 Nykthos. We're also running 16 plains and 2 Springjack pastures. This is kind of the goat tribal land. Comes into play untapped. You can tap it for a colorless. You can pay 4 and tap it, which is basically the equivalent of paying 5 mana, to tap it to create no 1 goat. Usually not useful, but okay for chump blocking sometimes. And if you have some Anthem effects, it might even come out as a 2/3 and be a good blocker. And then it also has this really neat third ability. Tap it, sacrifice X goats, add X mana of any color to your mana pool, and gain X life. So this is another good way to help us push out Iona and Elesh Norn. If we just have a ton of goat tokens, but we don't have quite enough mana to cast those big creatures, we can sacrifice some of those goat tokens, gain life, which helps us against aggro or even other decks to help stabilize, and then put out a super big threat. Alright, so those are the lands. Now we move on to the sideboard. 2 Ghost Quarters. This is in almost every deck I play. Helps against things like Tron. 2 Brave the Elements. Help us get through against other creature decks that are a specific color. We can just give all of our creatures protection from that color. Can help in blocking too. Help us take down a bigger threat that we wouldn't have been able to take down anyway by giving our creatures protection. 3 Fragmentize. Destroy artifacts and enchantments. Then some disruption. We're not running any disruption in the main deck, which can be a serious flaw. It's possible some of these could be moved to the main deck. We're running 2 Journey of Nowhere to help us remove creatures, and 3 Oblivion Rings to help us remove anything. Planeswalkers, creatures, more artifacts and enchantments, maybe ones that cost more than 4, I don't know. Just a great catch-all at 3 mana. Also, both of those have devotion pips that are a little bit hard to remove and often stay on the battlefield. Then we're running another legendary creature package. So 3 more cards that are just one-ofs of legendaries that in particular matchups might be okay. Brigid, Hero of Kinsbale, rather. 2/3 first strike. Tap, Hero of Kinsbale deals 2 damage to each attacking or blocking creature target player's controls. Obviously, usually you use this on your opponent. Does have a neat synergy with Boros Reckoner, where you can do 2 damage to your own Boros Reckoner to hit something for 2 damage. But obviously, more often than not, you'll just be using this against kind of go wide creature decks like tokens or goblins or things like that, where you can wipe their whole board just by tapping her. Hokori Dust Drinker is a 2/2 for 4. This is a super neat card. It kind of surprises me that it doesn't see more play, but I think the fact that it's legendary and then also is a little overcosted, 2/2 for 4 is not exactly a great rate. It's probably the reason it's not. Its ability is lands don't untap during their controller's untap step. So this is both for you and your opponent. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player untaps a land he or she controls. So this can help us turn off other decks that are running a ton of big mana stuff that can only untap slowly. And for us, it's not quite as big a deal because we're running things like Nykthos that help us pump our mana up pretty fast. So sometimes this is pretty powerful. I think it's especially powerful against things like Control that run and need a lot of mana, but don't run a lot of big mana like Tron or other Devotion type decks. All right, and then finally, probably the most useful of these sideboard legendaries, Linvala the Preserver is a 5/5 for 6, which is not a great rate, but a 5/5 flying for 6 isn't terrible. The important part, though, is she has, if you have less life than your opponent, you gain 5 life, so that helps a lot against things like aggro. And if you control less creatures than your opponent, put a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Not usually that relevant for us because we are usually the deck with more creatures, but certainly can be useful, especially again against go wide strategies like elves or tokens or goblins or any of those really go wide creature decks. And so that's the deck. I'll talk a little bit about matchups. My matchup outlook is not super positive. I think we're a little too slow to deal with aggro. We do have some stuff to kind of chump block in the early game, but I think we take a little too long to get to things like Elesh Norn to really stop our opponent. I mean, I don't think we have a terrible percentage against them. Our 2-drops are pretty good against them, like Knight of the White Orchid, 2 first strike's pretty good. Thalia is not bad. Can certainly slow down things like Burn and can also block pretty well against some of those decks. Overall, I think we're a little slow, and we do have some do-nothing enchantments and things like Honor of the Pure. Not do-nothing, but like we don't have creatures out, and we play that turn. Like, play our turn 1 play, they Lightning Bolt it, play Honor of the Pure turn 2, they double Goblin Guide us or something, we're going to be way behind. So we definitely can fall behind in those matchups. I think against combo, we're a little too slow, and we just don't have interaction with them. So I think that's probably our single worst matchup. And then my outlook for mid-range and control is a little higher. Control does have the problem where, especially with creature wipes, they can get rid of all of our devotion at once, which puts us way behind. But we are pretty grindy. We can kind of keep up with them on mana from our cards that get us mana. We can kind of keep up with them on card advantage with things like Thraben Inspector and Flicker Wisping it if we need to. So I don't think it's like all gloom and doom. I just don't think it's great. So yeah, that's kind of my outlook there. Mid-range, I think, is probably our best matchup. We might even be slightly favored just because we're pretty grindy and we also have a lot of go over the top. I think it's pretty hard for most mid-range decks to beat an Elesh Norn. And quite honestly, it's hard for a lot of them to beat Iona too, although it'll be a little harder for us to cast that since a lot of mid-range decks do have a lot of single target removal that can keep us low on our devotion. So not a super positive outlook, but I'm looking forward to playing the deck and seeing how it goes. I did a couple practice matches and it went surprisingly well, but practice matches are practice matches. You never know how it'll actually turn out. But yeah, it should be fun. Hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech, and I'm going to jump into some games. I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.
Hey guys, BobGar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.